Thank you very much, who led and not facilitated the panels. Big difference. So all the other English terms and concepts that are developed here, well, when we talk about leading, comes from, well, a pilot. The pilot guides you into, well, the harbor because he knows where the coral reefs are, and then he guides the ship safely through these narrow passages. So thank you very much, and I think this little task of publishing the conference proceedings, we still have a year ahead of us where we can do that. Thank you.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, ich darf Ihnen jetzt ein Highlight des heutigen Tages, ein weiteres Highlight ankündigen.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me now announce one of the highlights of today. You probably are aware of the NATO strategies and its operative concepts, and you know that its setup and posture was changed on various occasions following at the end of the Cold War. You know that there was a whole bracket of units from north to south, very static. This was then replaced in part by dynamic concepts, Southern German area, French division, Austrian area, and so on. And then it even turned in something like a counter-operative. Then we have the second strategic concept, all the kinds of things that then probably sped up the end of the Warsaw Pact. It's interesting to see, and interesting in terms of security, and you can look up the Iran cooperation study of 2014 and 15, which gives some more information on this. The fact of how a Russian surprise strike, which is not very likely maybe, but in the slowest case will only need 72 hours to reach Tallinn and Riga. You need 7 brigades, heavily mechanized in part, to stop them. This is not defense even, it's just about slowing them down until the NATO countermeasures can start. And the RAND study shows some details. The follow-on forces concept has been studied and simulated on an operative level, has been adopted then, but maybe since there was no chance to exercise it at a tactical level, there might be small gaps. The computer simulation showed that the slowing down, the delay you can cause, may not be quite sufficient. And if you enter all the parameters, you could see that the coordination between air and land forces is working, that the potential losses were correct as they had been calculated, but the attacking aircraft can only have the respective strike precision if the tanks can be slowed down. But then again, there's the probability of how do you slow down the tanks, and in the tactics area this has not yet been trained. Of course, it was never necessary to put this concept, which is brilliant as such, has never been used, but it would have needed some more exercise. Now, we are being supported by the JSEC, the Joint Support Enabling the March, which is now being established in Ulm in Germany, and its commander has promised that he will support us also at this conference. One of his representatives, Mr. SEIFERT, is going to talk about the functional principles of this rear operational area, which non-experts might see as a resupply area. But to say the truth, the operative concepts of NATO are moving towards movability, striking force, and the likes, and the rear area. is actually the expression of a completely new operative concept and a resurgence, if you will, of the defense potentials of NATO. I'm looking forward very much to these presentations. We have a delay of 10 minutes, which we are behind schedule. Of course, you can have these 10 minutes. Brigadier, you have the floor.
Ja, vielen Dank für die freundlichen.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. My name is Thomas Seifert. I'm a General Brigadier and I'm the DCOST Support Deputy Chief of Staff of the multinational joint headquarters in Ulm, and I would like to talk about the new JSEC, Joint Support and Enabling Command, and the links between the rear area and other aspects from a strategic point of view. Some information about my background so that you know where I'm coming from. I have a aircraft and technical background, have then moved on to logistics, and after general staff training I was dealing with questions such as armaments cooperation and planning, was part of the minister's planning staff, and have also had a chance to actually work at the interface with politics, which allows you to understand many of the things we have been talking about in the last few days and will be talking about until tomorrow. And so this has influenced my point of view in a way that I am in charge of staff, material, logistics, IT, infrastructure, financial resupply, and then a core staff element of a joint logistics support group is also reporting to me, which at a tactical level has certain support tasks which it could offer. In Ulm, we do not just have the multinational joint headquarters, but also the joint JSEC. And the multinational headquarters is the parent headquarters for the establishment of these new joint support and enabling command, which has been or is supposed to be created out of nothing. I'll give you some details about what we're planning, and I'm happy to be here. It's the first time a representative of our command has the pleasure of being here at the Vienna Strategy Conference. And speaking about Vienna and Austria, it's quite obvious that one of us would find his way here, because the multinational joint headquarters actually is also a military and military politics lighthouse project between Germany and Austria. The largest part in terms of multinational presence in Ulm is actually provided by Austria. And I'm not going to give you any new information if I tell you that my counterpart at DCOS Ops is an Austrian brigadier. And as I started my service in 2016, it was Brigadier Thomas Starlinger. And if you've been reading the news lately, you know that he is nowadays the Federal Minister of Defense. And so if you look at the careers operators turning into ministers 2 to 3 years later, I'm still sitting in Ulm, but just joking, I don't think anyone would actually necessarily like to take Minister Starlinger's place currently, because it's quite a challenge he's faced with, and we all wish him all the best for these tasks. And there's a second link also to his successor, Brigadier Christian Platzer. He currently is the head of operations in Ulm, and I think about 10 years ago he was the chief editor of the OMZ, the Austrian Military Journal, and he probably helped making the link. And Minister Starlinger probably will be busy and not watching the live stream, but I do hope that Christian Platzer may be watching us. And Christian, I hope that you will agree with everything I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. quite sure of this. Then just a final sentence by way of introduction, and on Germany and Austria, I arrived last afternoon, and what I can see is that, of course, we have a very German focus here in our presentations. You mentioned many German aspects here, and I thought at times, well, isn't this like the Germans attacking this Austrian platform here? And they're only talking about Germany all the time. But actually, I don't think it is, and you all know that it's not the case because a nation can't be on its own. So any security policy challenges are common to all of us, and by their geographical position, being neighbors, Germany and Austria are very close and have been interlinked for many, many centuries. We have a similar political setup, federal systems, and so on. And so I think it's quite normal that German problems are being discussed here in Austria too. So let me now turn to the actual topic, JSEC and the rear area from a strategic point of view. And to link this up to the general topic, strategy and will, let me start with the security policy developments, which were at the basis of the establishment of the JSEC in Ulm, which is currently being done. And the JSEC is supposed to be the operative headquarters for the rear area, and will then go on to explain our specific plans as regards the implementation. So JSEC and rear area, that's the main topic of my presentations. I'm not going to touch upon military philosophy that much, which has been touched upon in the course of the conference. I will focus on the practical point of view, on the real life impacts of strategic considerations, and on the fact that if there's a will to implement things and not just describe them in position papers and documents, that this can have a real impact. So JSEC could be considered a intention by the alliance to react to the new situation following Russia's annexion of the Crimean Peninsula, and I will of course also talk about JSEC, its tasks, where it comes from. I would like to give some information here, because we are actually realizing that there are many different points of view, different levels of information, depending on who you're talking to. There are different expectations, which is quite difficult for us too, also in terms of expectation management. If you look at the national US point of view at what JSEC is supposed to do, it's quite different than what NATO, international organizations, the German Ministry of Defense thinks. So it's really quite a challenge for us. And so I want to make sure that by giving you first-hand information, we may be able to steer future discussions in a direction which we think is the right one. Let me move on to the first part of this presentation, recent developments in the area of security policy since Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula back in 2014. This was a turning point for NATO, which started a new thinking process. Of course, you could also ask whether the annexation process itself was the consequence of a turning point after the strategic developments of the years before that. But I'm speaking on behalf of NATO here, and as a German representative, a German general, and so I have to give you our view of these developments. Of course, it goes without saying that, especially as regards our eastern and southeastern partners in NATO, there's a real threat perception, which is not something they just imagine or just pretend. It's obvious, and it has been mentioned several times yesterday. And one of the basic aspects of NATO is to provide the same amount of security to everyone, the same extent of security. And if there is a substantial problem in this respect for our Eastern partners, then we have to find answers to this. So it's become clear that we may see scenarios which may also lead to a violation of the territory of the alliance and may then trigger a reaction by NATO. And ultimately, you can say that we returned to alliance defense and national defense as general concepts in the ultimate respect. So away from crisis support or crisis solution and other activities, we returned to the foundations of NATO as a political alliance, defense alliance with a considerable military power. On the other hand, of course, you can't just take out the old blueprints from the Cold War times, because the situation has changed and the threat situation is actually different than what we had during a Cold War. Nowadays we have asymmetric hybrid warfare, kinds of warfare, and conflicts below a certain level of escalation which would trigger military force. So many things are actually evolving in peacetime condition, many conflicts, and this is a completely different situation than what we had during Cold War. And you can see 3 lines here, or 3 boxes here. So what are the things that were decided? The summit in Wales took place in September 2014, a short time after the annexation, and it was there that the Readiness Action Plan was approved. Assurance measures such as persistent presence, to name but one, were decided. Adaptation measures, which, for example, then led to the Very High Readiness Task Force, VJTF, which is something we're also dealing with currently. Two years after that, the Warsaw NATO summit took place, and it was at a time when the first measures had already been started. The focus there was strengthening deterrence and defense posture, and enhanced forward presence was another focus that was decided. And then the last point, which is a trigger for the organizational changes and the establishment of JSEC, was the Brussels summit last year, which decided the NATO command structure adaptation. NATO command structure. Now, this went back to 2016, the summit in Warsaw, which confirmed the need to assess a NATO command structure in recognition of a changing security environment. So this was basically the mandate to prepare suggestions as to how the NATO command structure could adapt it. The defense ministers then went on to decide in February 2018 that within the NATO command structure there should be a cyber operations center in Mons to have a component command on a tactical level in response to cyber threats, and establish two new elements in the NATO force structure: the Joint Support and Enabling Command and the Joint Force Command in Norfolk. We'll see how this is dealt with in the on the strategic level. So this was the starting point for JSEC. And in addition, in June last year, the defense ministers decided that Germany, as a framework nation, should take over the JSEC mandate. It's not a command structure, so there's no common funding. It's rather a NATO force structure, which means that one of the framework nations will be organizing it. So this is the command structure that emanated from it. It should be known the NATO headquarters at the political and strategic level, then the military level Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, or ACO, Allied Command Operations. That's the strategic level. Then at the operative level you have two joint force commands, Brumsum and Naples, which have been existing, and then another two which have been added to the force structure with by framework nations. The JFC in Norfolk, the US are the framework nation, and JSAC with Germany as a framework nation. Now, talking about will, you always have to have the right people. And establishing a JSAC, that's something which bears the imprint of acting NATO commanders of that time. General Scaparotti, who was SACEUR up until a few weeks ago, and he also used his personal experience in Korea, where he had a rear area operations command, and he said we need something like that. And then we had Lieutenant General, retired but now Hodges, the commander of US Army Europe, and he had suffered quite a few difficult experiences with the increasing troop movements of the Americans in a framework of rotations, forward presence, enhanced forward presence, which means that larger units in brigade size were moved across Europe, and you could see the problems involved with this, the time it took, and these two decisive figures, or decisive leaders rather, came to the conclusion that something has to be done against the security situation. We have to provide the enablement of secure areas of responsibility, and the rear area plays a fundamental role in this. The Austrian Chief of General Staff said yesterday, of course you always have to look at whether there's enough funding available. That will tell you if the will is strong enough. And of course one could say that this should be established under the command structure, while in truth it is being established under the NATO force structure. So you could say there's not enough will to finance it out of the common budget. But let me mention two additional aspects which explain why this decision was taken. This is something that strengthens the acceptance. If in the rear area you have a command which is established, then this is always a challenge as regards the trust and acceptance by the affected countries, and it might be easier if you do it with a command of the NATO force structure. And it also affects questions of flexibility. If it's NATO command structure which is involved, it all has to go up to the political level, the council, so it all takes a long time. But elements of NATO force structure are actually based on MOUs, agreements between the affected nations to take a certain measure, and so there's increased flexibility in this model. But it was a difficult process, which is actually exemplified by the name, because it's actually an area operations command, and that was the original plan, to name it, to give it this name. But having an operations command in the rear area, a sovereign country, that's something which may not be quite acceptable to everyone, and that's why this name, the current name was chosen, Joint Support and Enabling Command. Now let me move on to a picture which shows the strategic situation and its assessment. As an alliance, we have to take notice of the fact that there is going to be a long-lasting strategic conflict with other parties, starting in peace times, when it may move on to crisis times and up to the main level of effort, a case in which the defense clause is invoked even. So it's a permanent process of facing challenges. There are all kinds of instabilities you have to deal with, and there may be strategic blows on in a different manner. Let me just remind everyone of the financial crisis, epidemics, natural disasters, and even major terror attacks, which may have strategic implications. So that's the environment in which JSEC and whatever will follow have to be developed. So NATO will have to have this 360-degree approach to fend off all kinds of threats. And of course, looking at the real geographical situation, this includes Russia, and terror is the other main element which must be taken into consideration. What do we need for this? Strategic flexibility. Let me just give you a few buzzwords which are important in this respect when we need strategic flexibility. This involves readiness, ad hoc readiness, then preparedness. We're talking about enablement, possibilities to do certain things in a certain area which may be needed with regards to larger troop movements, then freedom of movement, situational awareness, 360 degrees, knowing where things are happening, seamless leadership structures and procedures in peace times and in crisis and war times. Reinforcement plays a big role. At speed of relevance is how we put this. You have to be fast enough in fulfilling your task. So these are the main buzzwords or challenges that define our current strategic position. If you look at the picture on the slide, you can see a situation we could face one day. In which we will need to protect the NATO territory. A joint force command, an operative headquarters, may have to take care of the secure deployment of follow-on forces from the United States to Europe. Then you have two joint force commands in a joint operations area, combat area if you will. And then in between you have the region area. And that's what JSEC is in charge of. If you look at the mission we've been given, and I quote from NATO documents more or less, there's one word you will not find, and that's logistics. If you look at what people say about the new JSEC in Ulm, they always say the new logistics command of NATO. That's not our primary mission. Our primary mission is to give support to host nations and at the request of host nations to provide security and force protection, area damage control. I'm just giving you a few words here. Protecting critical infrastructure. And only carry out security operations if host nations, which are sovereign nations, of course, ask us to do so. And that's what we are in charge of as an operative headquarters. So, if you will, this is not about logistics primarily, but about transnational security in a situation where sovereign states would usually be in charge of their own national security. It is our task to support them in a transnational matter in our area of competence. Let me show you a few pictures. Security does not just refer to the military aspect. It also includes aspects of civil security, protecting critical infrastructure. To give you an example, the rear area is obviously very important for follow-on forces too, which have to be moved, trained and integrated so that they can be moved to the joint operations areas of the joint forces command as fully trained and prepared follow-on forces. And that's what happens in the rear area. Then you can also see logistics and sustainment. That's one of the processes that, of course, have to take place in the rear area. But it's not that we have the main competence here. The main competence lies with the functional domain advisor for logistics. It's a standing joint logistics support group which manages and leads the logistics network. But of course, many of these things are actually taking place in the rear area, so we play quite an important role for these processes, because we have to make sure that these processes can be carried out securely and safely in the rear area. So the functional advisor, who's the battle space owner, is the person we have to work with. Logistics decisions can only be made if the operative situation is taken into account, and it's us who are monitoring this situation. What is the particular aspect of rear areas? Can you define this term? Well, NATO says it can consider all parts which are not joint operations areas as rear area. So in a conflict you have a joint operations area which is assigned, and everything that's left in the SECUR's area of responsibility is the rear area. Of course, this is not the backward area in the joint operations area as far as the land component is considered. They also use what they call a rear or backwards area too, but we are a rear area from a strategic point of view, from the SECUR's point of view. And this area has to be covered starting from peacetime conditions. In peacetime conditions, of course, there is no joint operations area. So by definition, the entire area of competence of the SECUR has to be regarded as rear area. So in peace times, we actually have to cooperate with all those countries which are in the SECUR's area of responsibility. And of course, they are sovereign states. And so the JSEC primarily has a coordination, synchronization function. It has to coordinate with the sovereign nation states, and it cannot make orders. It's acceptable for a sovereign state to be told by JSEC to move the troops here and there. We cannot make any orders as regards things which are in the territorial territorial competence of a state. And it was recognized, and so it was decided that we need a headquarters at an operative level which coordinates the countries and coordinates those nations' support um, so as to have an overall picture in the rear area. The rear area is characterized by a huge number of stakeholders who act in this area, starting from elements of the NATO command and NATO force structure. Then you have GOs, NGOs, IOs, cyber activities, the private sector, the industry. These are questions or actors, players rather, who act in the rear area and it's important for them to have a secure rear area.
So JSEC is a single point of contact, as we now also say in German, at the operating level. And we know we have no troops that are assigned to us, and this may differentiate us at the operating level because others have land components, air components, maritime components, and similar. What we are currently planning to do is, at the tactical level, we are going to maybe have a joint logistics support group. So it becomes clear that the essential actors in the rear area are nations, and the nations, they either want to go through the rear area or they are in the rear area themselves, they're transit nations, and as transit nations, they provide post-nation support for the armed forces. So this is the challenge we are dealing with. So a highly complex subject where a lot is expected of us, but our capabilities, based on the given situation, are sometimes extremely limited. So we have to rely on the goodwill of various nations to cooperate with us, provide us with information, and to maybe cooperate with us. Now, how is this done at the operating level as a command? So our mandate was interpreted by us, so we did an operational design with lines of operation. And the first three that you see here, I think you still remember this mandate, logistics, sustainment. I just explained that. That's not a direct mandate, but it is actually a core process that is exercised by us. And this is why it has its own line of operation here in this chart. Now, what is it that we want to achieve? What is the end state of all of our efforts with JSEC? To have a functional and secure rear area. That's the objective. So our rear area should be secure so that all processes can be conducted there that are necessary, and of course it needs to work as well. So if things are destroyed and then secured, that's no use. So it has to be secure, safe, and it has to work. That's the objective for the rear area. And we're not only doing this on land, but the rear area has to be seen in all the domains: land, air, sea, space, cyber, special ops, so everything that needs to be considered. That's what a normal joint forces command would be doing at the operating level anyway. So this is also part of our mandate. And what's special about this is that all of that needs to be coordinated with the various nations that use their own forces, their own troops, that have national operations, that develop resilience measures, etc. So those lines, if you consider this as, let's say, the escalation of a conflict, what is it that we do? In times of peace, we just build networks. So we get in touch with all nations, we find a contact point, a person who talks to us about all questions that need to be clarified in terms of the rear area. So this network needs to be knit, needs to be maintained. For that, we need knowledge. What's the situation like in the various countries? We don't have that now. There is no common overview of sovereign states where they would report their resources, their constraints, what's considered critical infrastructure, etc. So we need to build up an information database that would enable us to fulfill our mandate. And then concrete measures need to be taken in order to ensure that the rear area is put in a position to support these processes as required, and in case of a crisis or a conflict, we are the operating headquarter. We need to come up with an operational plan for the rear area, and in the end we need to execute this plan. So this is what the Joint Support Command does as a headquarter at the operational level. This brings me to the last part, implementation. What do we have in mind, how this should be implemented, and how have we already started implementing this? Now, the starting point is that the multinational command operational headquarters in Ulm, where I'm in charge of support, and until the end of June, for another 4 days, we're in a standby phase, the Joint Headquarters Bravo and smaller joint operations. So in 2018, we had passed through an evaluation and certification process. So we are certified as a joint headquarters at the operational level, and also at the tactical level. We have a joint logistics support headquarters that we are providing. So basically, we use the existing know-how and also the existing infrastructure, materials, equipment, what we already have in Ulm in the multinational command and operational leadership center. When it comes to implementation, the question is, who is in charge of implementing JSEC? Well, I already anticipated the answer. Germany is supposed to do that. What speaks in favor of Germany? It's the central location in Europe, the comprehensive infrastructure that is also relevant for all the processes that are running in the rear area. In the final analysis, and I don't know whether this is correct, but the US are also interested in the Germans taking over here for various reasons, because it's a complex challenge. This is uncharted territory. It's about cooperation and moderation, facilitation, and some other presentations have also referred to the fact that this is something that Germany is quite good at. So these are very complex challenges that the Germans are good at dealing with systematically, to talk to different nations, to use a cooperative approach. I believe that this is something that is a hallmark of German politics. And this is why the US believed that the Germans should be doing that. And this also coincided with the Germans' interest that we are ready to take more responsibility. So that's a visible investment in defending our alliance. And the Germans have suggested or proposed to provide the JSEC, and so it was also in Germany's political interest to set up the JSEC. Now, the next question was, where would it be deployed? Now, there were ideas to use Bonn as a location, but there were a lot of conceptual considerations that were yet to be finalized. We believed that there would be a phase of activation and that we could go to Ulm, and the operational headquarters there could be used for that. So in the final analysis, one thing became quite clear. NATO expected permanent service is to be provided by Germany, and they couldn't really have justified such a complicated process. And at the end, there was an offer made by the General Inspectorate to also set up this command to SEIFERT in times of peace. So a more permanent headquarters had to be conceived of, and that had to be able to quickly start its work. So in the end, Ulm was found as the ideal location. It had just been certified as a joint headquarters of NATO at the operational level, and then said that the multinational command is the parent headquarter, the supporting headquarter, to come up with this JSEC setup. Now, a fortunate circumstance was that we had just happened to invest a lot in Ulm for another job, however, but we could use this investment also for JSEC. So JSEC is also in the Wilhelmsburg barracks, where the multinational command is located, and shortly there will be a new operational center, a conference and service support center will be finished. It had actually been intended to serve the mandate operations headquarters of the EU activities, but now these infrastructure premises are very helpful in order to take over this new job, this new assignment. What we are going to lose in future is to act as a mobile headquarter, so the Joint Force Task Quarters. Instead, we get the JSEC order, and we also have the mandate to act as an EU supreme headquarters at strategic level. So that's our future mandate, JSEC +1, so one more task in addition to the JSEC. So we provide the headquarters with the support of the Ulm Command Center, and my top priority, and I don't formally belong to the JSEC, but I'm still providing the support for the setup of the JSEC. Now, let's take a look at the implementation process of JSEC. If you take a look at how this looks, it's a full operational capability already in 2021. Now, if you consider that the decision taken in 2018 that this will be going to Germany, to Ulm, and then 2 years later, we were supposed to provide for full operational capacities, and of course we had to create the foundation, the legal foundation, technical arrangements with all participating nations. These needed to be harmonized also with NATO and SEIFERT and whatever. So the big problem, as usual, is also a question relating to equipment, IT, infrastructure. All that had to be clarified. But our approach was that by the end of this year, that is to say until September of this year, there would be initial operational capability, which is characterized by the fact that we are setting up the center, we know what we're supposed to do, we talk to all parties concerned, we have agreed with them what needs to be done so that we have a common understanding about our mandate, we're all on the same page, and then in 2020 we'll enter the test and refine stage, where we are going to participate in the first few exercises in connection with the Defender relocations that the Americans are doing. We want to also add our own exercise where we want to create an operational picture, and internal processes will be tested and tried out, so that by 2021, by the 30th of September, the full operational capability will be reached, and all of that will be then demonstrated in a high-quality exercise. So by September of 21, we need to be fully operational and ready to become active. That's quite a challenge, and our objective is to synchronize this with the other Joint Force Command that has been added in Norfolk. They have the same challenge as we do. Now, what we have ready, I'm not going to show you a slide with the structure, because I believe at the beginning of such a transformation that will take a couple of years. We started with an element that was a staff of 30 individuals, and we now have a peacetime establishment. This peacetime establishment has a total of 270 individuals. This is supported by the Multinational Command on Operational Leadership, and our peacetime structure is derived from the structure that we need for a crisis establishment, as they say. So this needs to be developed, and at the end, and I think this is not a secret, we're going to have a similar structure as any JFC has. So with plans, operations, support, 3 pillars. And hopefully we're also going to have comprehensive participation from multinational stakeholders. We also have pledges from 10 different nations that want to participate in this project of setting up the JSEC. And this JSEC, on account of its special task of transnational security and the coordination, depends on multinationality. So a German JSEC is inconceivable, so it needs to be a multinational JSEC where all parties concerned and interested nations can be integrated. So this is our final objective. This brings me to my summary, the last slide. JSEC, what's the essence of JSEC? It's a bespoke, a tailor-made NATO headquarters for the rear area in Sarko's area of responsibility or remit, the single point of contact for all nations that coordinates and synchronizes all activities in a highly complex network. It serves primarily the enablement to reach strategic flexibility, transnational security in the rear area is to be guaranteed. The end state is that the rear area works and is secure in times of peace without interruption, even in cases of crisis and even in cases of us having to defend our area, also in case of an alliance breach. Now, this brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that I've been able to spare you the NATO German, just German-English or Germanish. A lot of expressions are very hard to translate into German, so I provided you with a mix of terms. I'm also a bit lazy, like Dr. Teichmann said. So I, however, used German and added a couple of English terms, not the other way around. So that's it from me. I hope that you now have a clear idea of what JSEC is intended to do, that it's not logistics headquarters of NATO, but the operational headquarters for the rear area of the Sarko. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think it promised too much in my introduction. I tried to just suggest in a very subtle way that this isn't an organizational subordinate project, but this is a paradigm shift in terms of the operational concept of NATO and this concept of the rear area and what is happening here. This is really a major shift, a major transformation. That's a milestone in the operational leadership of NATO. And thank you very much for this clear presentation. I didn't know how much you would be showing us, but I think that even for the insiders, it is now clear what this is about. So thank you very much. Now, Ulrich, you have the first question. Thank you very much for this clarification. I have two questions on your concept of functional. Your officers, your multinational officers who are coming to see you, do they have the procurer as liaison agents or the normal mules? So that also means that we will have to develop a concept for the member states. So do you have the procurer or the mandate, or do you have the legal possibility to come up with such an HNS concept for everybody and then to provide it to the individual nations? To your first question, the multinational participation, maybe I wasn't concrete enough, but the JSEC is going to have a multinational NATO headquarters. So NATO headquarters, which is based on the Paris Protocol. So the officers who are going to go to this NATO headquarters are going to be dealt with on the basis of the Paris Protocol. So the objective is not to have a German JSEC the way it is now, but to have a technical administrative arrangement with the interested nations that will be negotiated. And then, of course, there's a command and control arrangement with SACEUR that will constitute the legal basis for this multinational participation. There will be no longer any German command, but it will be an international NATO headquarters. Let's call it that. So much on your first question. We're not there yet, however, because we need to negotiate the legal foundations of that. Then the HNS concept. Well, I had already suggested this. Nobody is telling us what to do. We have this rough mandate and not a lot more, and everything that we are now doing and think we need to do in order to fulfill this mandate, we will do as long as the nations cooperate with us. So if there are nations that are saying they see no need to cooperate with us, they don't want to, then we have no legal basis. So we need to convince the nations that it's in our joint interest to harmonize this process, and the first actions we are hearing are quite positive. So every nation that we have talked to sees that it is necessary to have such a coordinated activity, because for every single host nation, this constitutes a problem if they are not really coordinated and if they provide the support in an uncoordinated way. So we are going to do everything we can in order to contribute to SACEUR's area of responsibility and what the nation can, well, participate in and support. Thank you very much for your deliberations. I understood everything, but I have a question of clarification. The command is needed for preparing for crisis management. Now, let's say there are some crisis areas, especially the eastern borders of NATO. Are there contingency plans or a GDP that also provides the framework for your work? The second question is, your command, and correct me if I'm wrong, is intended for all NATO countries. So let's take a scenario where Spanish divisions are relocated to northeastern Europe. Will they also be under your command? And a third question is, first the battle groups will be brought forward, or the national ones? And the BCGF, will this be brought forward by you, or is there a special regulation for that, for your headquarters? And what happens in case of a crisis if the Eastern European border is described as a crisis region? Well, this is quite a challenge. This has been, well, a plethora of questions I can summarize, because you had a lot of individual questions. Now, I'm not trying to shirk this question, but as far as JSEC is concerned, there are no NATO documents pertaining to it. You know how NATO documents are produced. So no matter where you look, you will not find the JSEC anywhere. It's quite clear because it hasn't played a role so far. So one of our challenges for the near future is that in this doctrine landscape and in our planning, we need to contribute the JSEC angle, and then it will be considered as well. So ideally, when you talk about planning, you know, it's always been that way and will always be that way. And there, JSEC will play a role. In what plan this will be the case, I can't tell you at this point, but it will play a role because it has to be governed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a plan, right? So these questions are currently being renegotiated. And as to your concrete question, the follow-on forces coming from certain nations going through the area, well, currently we don't really know whether there will be a transfer of authority, or whether they will be temporarily under our command if they cross our territory or not. I would rather assume that there will not be any major changes there, but that basically the individual nation will be in charge of its own flows of personnel and material to make sure that they get to where they're supposed to go. But we are the ones to contact for coordination purposes. So we bring them forward, and nation XYZ will tell us we are planning to do this or that, and we then coordinate with the standing GLSD that is in charge of logistics and with us as the battle space owner, and then we will synchronize and organize this. The immediate reaction, well, will probably be handled by JOA. So the Joint Forces Command will be dealing with that. Naples, not us. I think we can have one more question, and then the military chaplain will give his presentation. So is there still one more question? Okay. If there are no further questions, thank you very much, General, for your presentation. And please send our warm greetings to your predecessor. Thank you.